Welcome to the meeting of White District Council Planning Committee on Tuesday 10th of March 2026. Thank you for attending or watching online. I'm Councillor Alan Bode, Chairman of the committee. Please be aware that this meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube and is also being recorded. Details of how the recordings are stored and how long they are retained for are available via the Council's website. As part of this Council's commitment to reducing the use of paper, Councillors and officers may use electronic devices during the meeting. Emergency procedure. There are no planned tests of the emergency alarm. The alarm does sound. Everyone present must leave by a designated exit route. If the preferred route is blocked, use the nearest signed alternative route. Do not use the lift. Everyone must assemble at a designated point, which is in the Central Reservation, Regent Grove, in front of the police station. Members of the public and press should report to a member of the Town Hall staff who will be wearing yellow fluorescent jackets. Councillors and officers should report to a committee officer. Please do not re-enter the building until the fire officer advises it's safe to do so. I have alongside me on my right Sophie Barbaloo, Principal Committee Services Officer, Tyrese Horton, Committee Services Apprentice, who's here observing only, Nigel Bell, our Legal Advisor. On my left, Gary Fisher, Development Manager, Dan Charles, Principal Planning Officer, Erin Weatherstone, Principal Planning Officer, and Will Holloway, Planning Enforcement Manager. Members can all check that you've seen the update report and have read it. Okay. Apologies and substitutes. Are there any apologies? No. Members' declaration of interest. Anyone with a pecuniary interest will need to leave the room and will be called back at the end of the item. Members are also reminded of a need to declare predetermination on any matter. Please may I have a declaration of interest? Councillor Gifford.
Yes, it's not a pecuniary interest, but it's sort of inadvertent. I've had a number of email correspondence with Leonard Barr, who is the director of Woodbury, but it hasn't been about this application at all. It's been about a quite separate matter, and it was only when I realised from the bottom of his email that it had a stuff all about Woodbury that I realised there was a connection.
Site visits. Does any member wish to record if they've undertaken a visit on their own for application on this evening's agenda? No. We now need to confirm the minutes of the 10th of February 2026. In line with our procedures, all members can vote on the approval of the minutes, although they may not have been there at the meeting. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Luckhurst and seconder. Councillor Knight. All those in favour, please show. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Councillor Ayleswood, I believe you abstain. You need to indicate that. Thank you. Sorry? Now down to business. Procedure for each application will be as follows. Each application will have a presentation from a planning officer. This is followed by registered speakers who will be invited to address the committee. I must ask that all speakers stick to their allotted time. Please can all speakers speak directly into the microphones and if necessary, move the microphones closer to you and ensure there are no devices in the way of your microphone. This will enable you to be clearly heard both here and on YouTube. Following registered speakers, the committee will then debate the application. During the debate, members, including myself, may well raise technical questions and issues to which the planning officers or advisors may need to respond, and I will normally invite them to do so. Please can I remind everyone that no officer or councillor will be permitted to address the committee without my permission. So Committee will then make its decision based on the information within the report, any representation at the meeting and the content of its debate. Once the decision is made, I will announce it after the vote. For the benefit of visitors attending the committee, all applications will be decided in accordance with the current National Planning Policy Framework and the Council's adopted local plan policies, which set out a presumption in favour of sustainable development unless there are material planning considerations that indicate otherwise. Applications are considered against policies containing local neighbourhood development plans that have been approved following a public referendum. Applications that accord with the local plan will usually be permitted. Applications must only be refused where there are valid planning reasons for doing so. This will help to avoid legal challenges against decisions and avoid unnecessary legal costs to the Council and Council taxpayer. Please note that I've already agreed that if needed, the meeting will adjourn at a suitable point around 2 hours into the meeting to allow for a comfort break. Finally, whilst I and all committee members fully appreciate the importance of the decision being made this evening and that they may well generate strong feelings, I take this opportunity to remind everyone to remain calm and courteous at all times. There aren't any action points for me to update you on from the previous meeting, so we can move to the first application, and that is agenda item 6, W/25/1678, land on the south of Chesterton Gardens, Royal Evidence Farm.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is an application for the variation of Condition 1 of Reserve Matters Approval for the revision of the layout to provide 199 dwellings in lieu of the approved 185 dwellings, all in pursuance of Outline Planning Permission, which was granted outline permission for up to 200 dwellings with associated access landscaping and public open space, and all matters on the outline were reserved apart from the access. So just to draw your attention to the scope of consideration, matters relating to the principal and access were approved at the outline stage and cannot be reconsidered as part of this Section 73 application. And the considerations on this application are limited to the revised conditions for the layout to facilitate the additional 14 units, and there are no other issues under consideration on this application. So this is the application site edged in red, which is the area to the south of the development known as Chesterton Gardens, access off Brimstone End here, which was approved at the outline stage. The remaining land in blue is also within the allocation for the wider development of up to 500 units, but this application itself was approved outline permission for up to 200. So just an aerial photograph. Obviously, works have commenced on site, as you'll see from the site photos, but obviously this is just to give you an idea of the site. Open agricultural field, sloping from the northwest corner down to the southeast corner. Existing residential development immediately to the north, the opposite side of the bridleway. You've got the railway line running to the west with development beyond, and then open countryside to the east and south. So this was the site layout as approved for the 185 unit scheme. Just showing the layout. And this is the site plan as proposed. So as you can see, if I flick between the two, in terms of footpaths, roadways, open space, it's similar between the two two proposals. So to aid, the additional plot numbers from 186 to 199 are the areas identified with the red cross. And then just an additional plan just to show where the changes are. The majority of the changes are done through the subdivision of existing units or the relaying out within the existing built form footprint areas. This has resulted in a slight over provision of 3-bedroom properties, which is predominantly to the offset by the undersupply of 4-bedroom units on the site. So whilst there is some change, it is more focused on the smaller units rather than the big 4-bedroom, 4+ bedroom detached properties. So just some photographs. So this is the site as viewed from Brimstone End, looking south towards the site access point. As you can see, development has started on site. And then we stood at the entrance point, looking west along the existing bridleway, and then east along the bridleway from the same position. And then this is looking from the end of Brimstone End's turning head, looking towards, as you can see, some of the properties are already under construction. And then just a photo showing the wider site. Obviously, it's currently fenced off, being an active construction site. But obviously, this is looking towards the southwest of the site, with the brook running along, following the sort of the tree line there. So, in terms of main points, matters relating to the principle and access were approved at the outline stage. Reserve matters has been previously approved on the site for 185 dwellings. This proposal would increase the number to 199, which is still in accordance with the original outline permission. No objection received from highways. Revised layout is considered acceptable, and the additional 14 dwellings will contribute towards the 5-year housing land supply. Should also clarify the additional units still retain the existing 40% requirement for affordable housing. So those numbers, as part of the 14, have also been increased. So there is no substandard delivery of affordable housing on this site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We have a number of speakers, and the first one is Elizabeth White, and you have 3 minutes from when you start.
Ascertainable ecocide, dirty business, foul play, not transforming Leamington's vision of water centre stage in the 21st century spa town. Has the risk register factored in claims for corporate manslaughter, now not only for the roads and unsafe walking route to school, but also for the wider river network? Children have played for generations in Whitnash Brook and on Pebble Island. Will the council be funding the elevated insurance premiums of those with colossal increased flood risk and now sewage pollution downstream? Section 38 officer might be happy to reduce the amount of adoptable road when Chesterton Gardens are still not adopted with no bus service, but underlying transport assessment was tested appeal and found flawed. The county's plan is for, quote, clean rivers and less flooding. Flood risk assessments already identify 10 locations affected by sewer flooding in the immediate vicinity and issues of safe access and egress. Is there actually an RP interested in the onerous obligation adjacent to the railway? 2022 reserve matters were called in for poor design and inconsistency with the Whitnash Neighbourhood Plan, refusal NPPF 139 and 214, with no tilted balance, NPPF 195 as no lawful appropriate assessment. Presumption is not in favour of unsustainable development, FW1, FW2, HE4 preservation, not desecration, NE5, presumption against development that would physically disturb an aquifer. Proposed sewage treatment plant has the same grid reference as nationally protected Whitnash Holy Well and falls within a designated green space designated as a nature reserve and wildlife buffer protected from inappropriate development. Very special circumstances have not been demonstrated. Local community and environment are suffering very substantial unacceptable harm for zero benefit. Croft Medical is not Calder Walk. Major adverse effects at year 15 were highlighted before inclusion of a foul pumping station, which affects 2 designated heritage assets and 2 protected designated habitat sites with no lawful appropriate assessment or water framework directive assessment, and again, no assessment of heritage or waterway policies. Retained control does not feature in the MPPF. Planning permission legally expired in 2024. Development commenced in breach of conditions. Despite the deceptive title, 1678 is a variation of a variation. All this needs serious investigation, not clearly dangerous delegation. Fundamental and substantial modifications require new planning application. Number of dwellings needs to be reduced, not increased, to remove and relocate all inappropriate development away from the floodplain and designated nature reserve and wildlife buffer and prevent hard edge. Proposed play area is currently more like a lake, boating lake, swimming pool. Please hold a recorded vote in the serious interests of public safety, public office accountability, probity in planning and the council's reputation. Thank you.
Thank you. I have another speaker, Sheila Cooper. Again, you have 3 minutes from when you start.
Excuse me, Chair, could you tell me why there's an echo on that? Has somebody else got their microphone on? It's very difficult to understand. A 7.6% increase in numbers of dwellings fails to equate to no change in quantum of development or layout. Neither does it meet accepted descriptives of non-material amendments as trivial in scale or impact. The no objection from highways, reinforced by their no adverse impact on the local highway network mantra, disingenuously fails to acknowledge the exponential increases in all traffic a 7.6% increase in housing numbers will generate. A reduction to 185 dwellings was hard won, mitigating unwelcome pressure on essential facilities, vital services and a single access bridleway crossing. Employing flawed interpretation of legislation to gain approval is shameful, undermining transparency and democratic accountability, allowing commercial profit-driven motives to override public interests, including environmental impact, health and safety issues and lawful public consultation. Approval and relocation by stealth of the foul water sewage pumping station, claiming non-materiality in spite of an officer descriptive as a new planning addition, manipulated legislation. Material amendments require resubmission, allowing public and statutory consultation. The decision breached democratic accountability and lawful decision-making. Non-disclosure of Bellway's Environmental Agency permit application to discharge 2,462 cubic metres of trade foul effluent a day into Whitnash Brook came to light by accident. The daily disposal of high volumes of toxic mixed effluent is fatally flawed. Subjective awareness of permit application and the substantial and unjustified risk posed by daily discharges of 2,500 cubic metres of toxic effluent into sensitive habitats within a vulnerable flood zone leaves officials with serious questions to answer. The irreplaceable ecology and biodiversity within the sensitive Whitnash Brook and downstream in the rivers Lem and Avon are already under stress. Ignoring grave health and safety risks for all users of the public rights of way, nature reserve, recreational access and perilously positioned children's playground next to attenuation facilities demonstrates reckless disregard. Potential life-threatening decision tainted by flawed interpretation of legislation undermine transparency, democratic control and accountability in decision-making, with affected existing and future residents and their families the ultimate losers. I ask this committee to please refuse this application for the weighty reasons above. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Mr. George Davis. Again, you have 3 minutes when you start.
Thank you, Chair. I will be reading the following statement on behalf of Matt Weston, the MP for Warwick and Leamington, who wanted to be here but is abroad on trade responsibilities. He sends his apologies. Ever since plans were first laid out for this housing development, which began more than a decade ago, back when I was a councillor, local residents and I have strongly objected to the prospect of this development. It was flawed from the outset and remains disastrous. Since then, the local planning authority and concerned residents have been put through 8 planning applications, of which this planning committee has so far refused 3, the submission of 899 objection comments, 3 appeals with the planning inspector, and the cost of all of this to the local planning authority and the taxpayer running into the tens of thousands of pounds. But now it gets even worse. The developer recently submitted an environmental permit application to discharge the equivalent of roughly 1 Olympic-sized swimming pool per day of trade site effluent into the Whitnash Brook. This application poses a serious threat to the health of the brook and its associated nature reserve, as well as the wider river ecosystem that the brook feeds into. That is why I was surprised that the council's portfolio holder responsible for green spaces and biodiversity, Councillor Roberts, who is also the local councillor for this site, appears to have been completely unaware of the permit application until after its initial consultation deadline. This oversight joins a long list of missteps whereby the local authority has fallen short in holding the developers to account. Now, I understand that the planning officer has advised the committee that objections that make reference to the principle of the development should not be considered in the determination of this application, so I won't repeat the outstanding concerns raised by local residents and I, as they are detailed in my previous comments. However, I am compelled to raise one important point for your consideration this evening. The reserved matters approval granted by this committee clearly fixes the scheme at 185 dwellings, and Condition 1 requires it to be carried out strictly in accordance with the approved plans showing that number. Recent case law from the Court of Appeals confirms that Section 73 of the Town and Country Planning Act cannot be used to change an operative permission or create what is in effect a different development. I would simply ask members to consider whether increasing the scheme from 185 to 199 through the use of Section 73 provides the Council with a sound legal basis, and whether such a change should instead come forward for a new application. By avoiding the scrutiny of a fresh reserved matters submission, the applicant is effectively seeking approval for a materially larger scheme through a process that offers far less detailed assessment or public oversight. I will end by reminding members of the comments made by Councillor Phillips when the committee last reviewed the developer's application to vary conditions 30 and 31, which this committee refused. He said, "It's always worth looking at the whys. What the developer seems to be doing here, by avoiding significant construction of temporary access to the site on that occasion, it really is just about saving money. Members, I must therefore ask, isn't the developer once again trying to cut costs by avoiding proper planning scrutiny? I urge you to oppose this variation of the application." Thank you.
Thank you. And the final speaker is Debbie Farrington, and you have 3 minutes when you start.
Thanks. I'm speaking in support of the application this evening on behalf of the applicant, Bellway Homes. The details of the proposal are set out clearly within the committee report, and we fully endorse the officer's recommendation to agree to the variation of Condition 1 of the Reserved Matters consent for 185 houses to enable the construction of an additional 14 dwellings. As noted in the officer's report, there is no objection from County Highways. It is made clear that the increase in dwellings to 199 as proposed was fully assessed and modelled for 200 units within the scope of the consented outline. This was considered acceptable by County Highways and was tested at appeal. No objection to the proposed housing mix, which would provide a mixture of 1 to 4 bedroom dwellings, 40% of which would be affordable in accordance with adopted policy. No objection to the location or appearance of the affordable housing proposed along the western boundary, which is deemed acceptable because the social landlord taking on these units will also be responsible for maintaining the buffer land between the site and the railway beyond. No objection to the revised layout, as it follows the same pattern as development as previously approved. There is no extension into any areas of public open space. The additional units are created through the subdivision of some plots. In addition, the layout achieves necessary separation distances and acceptable garden sizes. No harmful impact in terms of drainage of the site. The surface water strategy in connections to foul sewerage would be unaffected by the proposed changes. Wastewater is discharged into the Whitnash Brook under licence from the Environment Agency. This licence requires the water to be cleansed before entering the brook. No objection to the proposed waste storage for bins. All properties will have appropriate facilities for the storage of bins and will be able to present their bins to the curbside for collection. I'd like to draw members' attention to the following. There have been a number of objections from the public to this application, but the principle for residential development on this site was established by the granting of outline consent in March 2025. This cannot be revisited through this application. The Reserved Matters application for appearance, layout, landscaping and scale was then approved in October 2025. The current application proposes minor amendments to the layout to increase the site's capacity to 199. This is not unreasonable since the outline consent gave permission in principle for up to 200 units. Whilst the proposal would only add 14 dwellings to the total numbers on the site, the proposal would assist the council as it cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land. Officers has acknowledged the need to deliver housing on this site, which is allocated for residential development within the current local plan, allocation HO3. I trust that committee will endorse their professional officer's recommendation and approve the proposals. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. That ends public speakers. Councillors. Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. I have, I think, 3 questions based on the assertions of the speakers. The first one was one of the speakers said that development has proceeded in breach of conditions and planning permission had expired. And I'd just like officers' comments on that, whether that's correct. The second is the questions raised about the discharge of the water into the brook. And I understand that is not an issue that we are considering here. Can you please confirm that's correct? And the third one was one of the speakers said that there is no sound legal basis for approval in this report. And again, I'd like comments on that assertion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So, as the development, as far as we're aware, was implemented in time from the, it was basically, the outline permission sets a time limit of 3 years or within 2 years of the date of the approval of reserve matters, whichever is the later. The permission was implemented within that 2-year period, pending the end of the reserve matters approval. So we're satisfied that there is a lawful permission that has been implemented. In terms of the discharge to the brook, that is a separate process directly to the Environment Agency for the permit. We don't have input into that as the local planning authority. That doesn't affect our decision making for this proposal. That's an entirely separate process which is governed entirely by the Environment Agency and not something that we have the power to control. In terms of the third item, the legal basis, obviously the outline planning application is the one that is the one that sets the parameters of the development for up to 200. A reserve matters approval is pursuant to that outline permission. So obviously we're not changing the operative part, which was up to 200 dwellings. The scheme that came forward at 185 was submitted originally by AC Lloyd to run that through that permission to keep that alive. That was later amended by Bellway to make their house types. The planning permission basis is based on the outline for up to 200. So we're satisfied that this can be dealt with through the Section 73 approach. So we're satisfied, and we've checked that with our legal officers, that is a lawful approach to be done.
Thank you.
Councillor Keller-Pritchard.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Kennedy, for raising the issue on Brook, and thanks to the officer for clarifying. My question is about, on page 13, the drainage strategy is stated as unchanged. Has the increased housing number been tested to ensure SODs remain compliant and safe near flood zone 2 and 3? And another question is about the pumping station, the capacity. It remains adequate, is what it says. Is it adequate for the increased number of houses to 199 dwellings? Has it been evidenced? Thank you.
In terms of the drainage strategies, obviously that's based on surface water runoff of the site. So obviously the site area itself remains the same. Obviously there are additional units, but in terms of surface water runoff for the drainage strategy, that will remain. The basis of the calculations will remain the same. So we're satisfied that in terms of surface water, that will still comply with the outlined drainage strategy. In terms of the pumping station, we don't have any evidence that demonstrates the scale or the size of the requirement. Obviously, that would be, the installation would have to demonstrate, once it's connected to the Severn Trent sewers, that has the appropriate capacity for the site. Again, a separate legal process with Severn Trent. As far as we're aware, we've not had any indication that the pumping station would not be adequate for an additional 14 units. So as far as we're aware, that is satisfactory.
Thank you.
Councillor Gifford.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. It's a question. Would the planning officers agree that a trade effluent licence is a fairly normal application for a construction site of this sort of site. It's not an abnormal thing to do. It's perfectly normal to apply for it because water requirements are sort of everywhere on a construction site, from concrete batching, screeding, hydro demolition, hand landscape and soak away and so on. And all of those have to be dealt with. And applying for a trade effluent licence is actually to make sure that it's clean water that goes into the environment rather than it's actually trying to make sure that the licence, which is nothing to do with us, but it is actually trying to regularise the working on a site. And the reason I'm making a lot of this is that it's something that's been brought up this time, hasn't come up in the past, but it's actually perfectly normal for a construction site of this size. It actually legally has to apply for a trade effluent discharge application. This is not something unusual. This is something perfectly normal. Would you agree? And I think it's important because it's been very much in the public domain that a swimming pool's, Olympic swimming pool size effluent could disappear, but it's actually, it shouldn't, it's for the Environment Agency to grant the licence, it's for the Environment Agency to put conditions on the licence to make sure that the water is clean when it hits the brook. It's for the Environment Agency to regulate that. It's not for us as a planning committee we have no powers over that. Is that correct? That is my understanding. I just wanted, the reason I'm asking this question is that it's something that's been mentioned by virtually every speaker, and I spent a long time at the weekend getting my head around it. I did write to the Environment Agency, pointing out the value of the nature reserve, and I would suggest anybody else who's concerned should write to the Environment Agency. It's not this planning committee that has any power over this, and it's a perfectly normal thing for a construction site of this size, or anything like this size, to apply for a trade effluent discharge. Sorry to go on at great length about it.
Yes, as far as we're aware, the discharge licence to the EA is a standard part of an application for a greenfield site. Obviously, what the Environment Agency will check is the demonstration by the applicants that the surface water that they are discharging to the watercourse is clean water, and demonstrating, the applicants must demonstrate it's treated correctly, how it's going to be monitored and everything else. So in terms of the discharge to the watercourse, that's obviously surface water off the site, and that none of this consent is to allow for sewage, untreated sewage discharge into the watercourse. It's a surface water discharge requirement. And you're correct, obviously the regulation of that for any discharge to a watercourse from any site is entirely up to the EA in terms of their regulation for their remit. Obviously I've had a look into the application. Obviously it's been submitted with an environmental study as well, which obviously the Environment Agency will assess with their own specialists, but yeah, it's not something that the LPA have any say in.
Councillor Margrave.
Thank you. Staying on that theme, I think there might have been some confusion from some people talking about sewage waste, but that's a separate thing. I think we get that. You've said that this is nothing. The water thing is nothing to do with the district council. Yet it refers to policy FW2 of the local plan, talking about surface water and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm a bit confused about how it can be nothing to do with us, yet we refer to it in the report, surface water management. So I don't know how we can say it's nothing to do with us and also refer to it. So when that report was written, did we have sight of the application to the EA? And is this a second application or their very first one for this site? Do we know?
Obviously, from our perspective, the surface water drainage strategy is demonstrating how runoff from this site to the watercourse will remain at an existing level of the greenfield rate plus the allowance for climate change. Obviously, that strategy was put in at outline stage and assessed by the lead local flood authority at the county council, who was satisfied with that scheme. This revised scheme, in terms of the additional 14 dwellings, doesn't require any changes to the surface water strategy. So from our perspective, obviously it's surface water treatment on site is to the satisfaction of the lead local flood authority from the outline permission. The discharge to the watercourse is a separate connection, which obviously has to demonstrate that it meets those requirements. So from our perspective, it's the treatment on site, how it is then discharged to the watercourse, that is a separate permit. Obviously, the standard for any SUD scheme on a greenfield site is it will discharge to local watercourses, which is why the drainage strategy demonstrates that the runoff rate will be no greater than the existing greenfield rate, plus an allowance for climate change. So whilst we have mentioned it in the report, obviously that details the ins and outs of how the water gets to the basin to be discharged to the watercourse. We're satisfied with that approach, and then it's the Environment Agency have the final say about that final discharge. So yes, drainage is mentioned in the report as far as it's treating the on-site surface water. The actual discharge itself is an Environment Agency matter.
Thank you. A second question if I can. One of the speakers referred to some case law, and I forget the details of it now, but is any of that relevant that was brought up when they talked about case law?
I don't know the specific case law. From our perspective, we obviously have checked the legal parameters of this development being dealt with as a Section 73, and we're satisfied that it's a legally sound decision. Obviously, we've gone out to consultation with the public as well, and obviously site noticing in the normal way, press adverts and everything else. So it is treating it as a formal consultation. So there's no bypassed process or anything else. It has been dealt with in the normal manner. So we're satisfied that it is a lawful determination.
Okay, can people pull their mics closer if they're not broadcasting too loud? Now call on Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. The bit I'm struggling with is the increase 7.6% in the number of properties. When this came as reserved matters for the 185 properties, I think the application was 23/1766. Now, in that one, both Environmental Health for the District Council and the Environment Agency made representations. And I just wonder, given that it doesn't appear that either EH or EA have made any representations this time, is that, without wishing to put words into the answer that you might give members, is that because the increase in the number of properties is judged not to be that material? I just wonder why, when it was at reserve matter stage for 185 properties, EH and EA made representations. Were they even consulted when this application came through for the 199 properties?
In terms of the consultations on this, obviously with the original reserve matters for the 185, that was setting the parameters for the entire layout. So obviously everything you see on that plan was under consideration, and obviously that included the properties along the western boundary with the railway, as well as obviously facing existing properties, and also the layout of the Suds Pond in the open space. So obviously on that application, we invited them to comment on those aspects of the scheme. With the scheme that we're looking at now, let's see if I can move the screen down. Obviously the areas that we're looking at here are sort of focused within the areas of the site that have previously been considered acceptable for residential development, and it wasn't deemed necessary to reconsult the Environment Agency or the Environmental Health Officer, because obviously the key aspects that they were looking at were obviously the impact from the railway noise on the properties, and we're satisfied that in this location that was not necessary to carry out that reconsultation.
Councillor Luckhurst.
Thank you, Chair. Just two, well, one legal, one possibly legal questions for Mr. Bell. So, if an application for 185 homes is approved, how many times can the applicant come back and just say, oh, I'd like 1 more, 2 more, 20 more? Is there a limit on that? And is there any value in the fact that a certain number has already been approved?
Chairman, I guess that there's no limit on how many applications they can make. You can't keep applying for exactly the same type of development, because the council can turn away duplicate applications. But if the developer wanted to continue to make changes, they can continue to apply.
Thank you. My other question, maybe, I'm not sure who it's for, so anyone jump in. Given that it's the Environment Agency and not us that determines whether this, what happens with the runoff, and the runoff would go into nature reserve, is there any way we can condition, say if we were minded to approve it, could we condition it that it has to be, I'm trying to find the right words, has to be dealt with properly, as per what we would expect the Environment Agency to do?
Chairman, we can't go back and reopen the outline and impose new drainage conditions on the outline, I'm afraid.
We're only dealing with like position 1, which is the numbers. Bearing in mind it started at 200, so it's still below that number. Councillor Ricardo.
Thank you, Chair. With the increase in number of houses, has it affected separation distance between the houses? 1. 2, has it affected public open space?
The separation distances remain acceptable. Obviously, the predominant changes are subdivision of plots, which already benefited from the relevant separation distances. In terms of the public open space was designed on the basis of 200 dwellings, actually did provide, in terms of total area, an over provision of public open space, and that will remain with the 199 units. So there's no substandard public open space or separation distances as a result of this proposal.
Thank you.
Councillor Margrave.
Just following up on Councillor Luckhurst's point, just to be super clear then, we can't have a condition that makes it, where you say it's acceptable, based on a successful EA permit being granted? Is that possible?
Chairman, you can't condition a matter that's covered by a separate regime. For example, you couldn't have a condition that said you must get building regulations approval because there's a separate regime that covers that. So we can't impose a condition that duplicates another regime.
I would just say on the Environment Agency, how is the planning system different? This is their documentation. Planning is a separate and distinct process from environmental permitting. Planning permission can be granted by a local authority without an environmental permit being in place, or vice versa.
Thank you for the clarification. So my question was going to be, you can't really see from those drawings on there, but as far as I worked out, they haven't provided any increased bin storage for any of these additional houses. So if you were to look, I don't think you'll be able to zoom in, but say 192 to 195, I think there's 2 short. I mean, they're very tiny boxes. But, so what we don't know, therefore, is have they provided enough bin space storage for all of these additional houses? It doesn't look like it. And the second thing, if you were to look again closely at properties 41 to 43, they've got the driveways of the houses overlapping the neighbours. So you can't see from that either, I don't think. So on that basis, that really looks like poor design. I think you'd have to bring up the PDF.
Councillor Gifford.
Thank you, Chair. I think we need to think hard about we are looking at an application for 14 houses, which brings the total to 199. 185 already have permission and are already being built. There's been a lot of talk about
Can you move your mic a bit closer, please? Move your mic closer.
There's been a lot of talk about the trade effluent licence, which has been a complete, it's something that's a legal requirement for a construction site. Yes, I would hope that the Environment Agency do everything that they should do, not necessarily what we'd expect to do, but what they should do, and ensure that the water is clean when it hits the brook. It's not something that we have any control over, and it's that said, there's nothing to stop people individually, and I've already written to the Environment Agency. There's nothing to stop people writing to the Environment Agency and explaining that they feel it's important that the Environment Agency take a really good look at this particular site and how it's operating while the construction goes forward to make sure the water is clean when it hits the brook. I actually have greater faith in Bellway than I do in the Environment Agency, but that's the situation we're in. So I would advise the public at large to write to the Environment Agency of any concerns they have, particularly about the nature reserve. In terms of the number of houses, we're looking at 14 houses to bring the total to 199. It has outlined planning permission for 200. I cannot really see, I'm not saying I don't feel this is a wonderful application. It doesn't fill me with joy, but I can see no justification to do anything other than grant this application as per the officer's recommendation. And I can see lots of problems if we don't, and I can't see any valid planning reasons to refuse it. Therefore, I'm going to propose that we grant this application as per the officer's recommendation with the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a number of other speakers. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you. So we have proposed a second. I'll take the speakers I've got, which are Luckhurst and Hazelwood. So, Councillor Luckhurst first.
Thank you, Chair. There was a comment from Waste Management asking that bin collection points are made a condition of planning to ensure that the developer does indeed build these areas and that residents are made aware they must use them, otherwise refuse and recycling will not take place. Has that been done? Because I can't see anything further. I might have missed it, but has that been made part of the application?
Obviously, the plans show bin collection points where they're off a private drive for obviously corralling bins to the edge of the public highway rather than, because obviously the bin lorry won't access private drives. So obviously there is householders will obviously have to present their bins to that point for collection. In terms of properties, obviously they've all got access to the rear gardens as well for bin storage out of, obviously not storing bins on the front. So we're satisfied that there is adequate bin storage for all properties. And obviously, in terms of bin collection, it's up to the householder to present that bin for collection, and obviously at the point provided. We can't, if people want to just store their bins at the front, I'm not sure that we can control that to that level, but obviously there is space within the plots in order to provide adequate storage for bins for every unit.
Okay, Councillor Hazelwood.
It's just a brief clarification. So just to follow up Councillor Dixon's earlier question. So I understand the Environmental Health and Environment Agency were consulted as part of the planning application for 185 houses. I wasn't clear whether they were reconsulted for this further application. I understood there was a question about noise and it wasn't seem relevant. So I just wanted to clarify whether they were reconsulted as part of this application.
They weren't reconsulted on this application.
No. Thank you.
Okay, I now have a proposal to accept the recommendations set out, proposed by
Sorry.
Councillor.
Can I interrupt? I never got an answer to my question about the bins or the bad layout of the driveways overlapping the neighbours. So on that basis, that's probably the only thing we can talk about here. If we're talking about these additional houses, they've not done a very good job. If what I'm saying is true, and I think it is.
In terms of the bin storage, obviously, as we mentioned, there is obviously, you've got properties that are semi-detached with access to the rear. Predominantly, the terrace properties also have access to the rear for storage of bins out of sight. The presentation points for bins need to be provided to the relevant size so that all bins can be presented. Obviously, there will be certain weeks where it will be an armada of bins out on the front with the 1, 2, 3 process that we operate. We can obviously add that as a condition if required to demonstrate that the bin collection points for the private drives are adequate. That's something that we can include if necessary. So.
Can I come back? So I think that would have to be a condition that they revisit the bin points, because the tiny pictures of the bins clearly show they haven't updated it. But I'm still don't like the fact that I think it's properties 41 to 43. Their drives don't look like they're hanging over the neighbours. I mean, you'd park your car half on one side and half on your own. It just seems a bit odd to me.
Obviously, this is the area here, isn't it? Obviously, with those terrace type of properties, obviously the space is limited. Obviously, normally we would expect tandem parking. There obviously is some tandem parking here, but with terrace properties, you will require frontage parking. And obviously, with the widths of the properties not being sufficient for 2 car widths, you're correct. There will be some overhanging. Obviously, we've had a look at that, and that's something that we considered is on balance acceptable in terms of the delivered scheme. Obviously, those are affordable units, and as far as I'm aware, the affordable housing provider has accepted those units to take them on as well, without any concerns. So we're satisfied that whilst it's not the best, it's not something that we would seek to either refuse or require to be amended.
Thank you. Do the proposer and seconder wish to add the bit on about bins?
Happy to include it.
Right, so that includes a condition on provision of bin space, I think is what we're looking at. But we'll leave it to the officers to do the appropriate wording for that. So, all those in favour, please show. Seven. Those against? 1. Abstentions? 1. That is clearly carried. Thank you very much. Can you carry on your conversations outside, please? Moved on to agenda item 5. W/23/1698, Woodbury, Berricote Road, Blackdown.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is for the demolition of the existing office building on the site and a number of other smaller buildings and structures and the erection of a new storage building with ancillary office space. The application has been triggered to Planning Committee due to the objection received from the Parish Council. This slide shows the application site outlined in red. The site lies within the West Midlands Greenbelt and in the countryside to the south-east of Kenilworth. The site has existing vehicular access points from the Berricote Road to the north, just here, and the site is currently occupied by a furniture business. The site includes a number of buildings, including larger buildings along the southern part of the site, you can see just here. And the light hatching you can see on the plans here indicates the areas of buildings and structures to be demolished as part of this proposal. This slide shows an aerial image of the application site with the approximate location of the site outlined in red. The Berricote Road is visible just to the north of the site, and the existing buildings are visible within the red line area. To the west lies Grade 2 Blackdown Manor, and to the south an existing garden nursery business with polytunnels you can see just here. To the north lies open field, which is crossed by public right-of-way W72, which you can see just coming in this location here, approximately through the fields, and it follows down to the south just here. There are other buildings located to the east, including care centre just here, and neighbouring buildings linked to the south. This slide shows the proposed site plan with a new building located to the western edge of the site just here. The existing vehicular access points will be enhanced as part of the proposal. You can see just here and here. A new car parking is proposed to the northwest in this location, with staff parking proposed along the eastern boundary. The turning area is proposed to be retained in front of the production and storage building here for HGV vehicles. New native trees and a native hedgerow is proposed along the frontage of the boundary here, facing the Berricote Road, with further planting proposed along the western boundary just here. To the south of the site, existing stalls, the wood dipping unit and the largest building on the site proposed to be retained. You can see just here. And all of the structures, buildings and external storage is proposed to be removed as part of the scheme. This slide shows proposed ground and first floor plans for the building. The office area is located to the northern part of the building, just here and here, with the remainder as storage. The new building will measure approximately 20 metres in depth and 27 metres in width across the 2 floors. This slide shows the proposed elevations of the new building within the context of the existing buildings to be retained. The new building will be simple in form with a material finish of timber under a dark grey metal sheet roof, and the building will have a shallow pitch roof, which you can see just here. Windows are proposed along the west and north facing elevations, and the vehicular and pedestrian access points are proposed on the alternative elevations just here. The building will have a height of approximately 8.3 metres to the ridge and 7 metres to the eaves. Building 1, which is the largest building to be retained just here, located on the plan, has an approximate ridge height of 6.3 metres and eaves height of 5.3 metres. The store identified as Building 2 is also visible, you can see just here, and has a ridge height of approximately 3.5 metres and an eaves height of 2.3 metres. This plan shows the larger buildings on site as existing, which include the 4 buildings just mentioned in terms of the buildings to be retained. It's Building 1, we've also got Building 2, Building 3, and the wood dipping unit with the office at the bottom of the slide, which is proposed to be demolished. Just to the right-hand side, I've just annotated the site plan to show the Building 1, Building 3, the wood dipping unit just here, Building 2, this is the office, We have containers over here and sheds 6 and 7 in this location with the vehicular access points just here on the site. This slide shows the remainder of structures across the site, which are proposed to be removed as part of the development. We've got containers here, we've got sheds 6 and 7 just at the top, and a number of smaller buildings within the application site as well. This slide shows an aerial image looking across the site in a southerly direction. Existing vehicular access points to the site can be seen just here from the Berricote Road. You can see the buildings along the southern boundary of the site here, as mentioned, here and here, and the wood dipping unit just here. This is the office buildings proposed to be demolished, and sheds 6 and 7. And you can see the neighbouring buildings behind in terms of the polytunnels, and that's outside of the application site, and the neighbouring buildings located to the side of the application site. This slide also shows external storage, which can be seen between the office and the buildings to the south, and in this area just here. This slide shows photographs taken from within the application site from the eastern vehicular access point. Shed 6 is visible just here, along with building 1. The bottom left photograph pans around, you can see shed 7 just there. And the right image pans around again, you can see the boundary with the Berricote Road and the existing planting and the parking area just here to the north of the site. A couple of further photographs. This photograph at the top left was taken adjacent to the office building, which you can see just here in a southern direction with the wood dipping unit and the store behind. The bottom left was taken looking across the site with the parking to the north just here and the office building just in the centre. The top right photograph was taken along the boundary of the site. You can see the office building just here, looking in a southerly direction. And the final photograph on this slide was taken looking north back towards the entrance to the road, to Berricote Road, with the office building just here behind the external storage. This slide shows a number of other photographs. The first one was taken from the western boundary, looking back with the office building just on the left-hand side of the photograph. The top right was taken from the land to the west, looking across the application site. You can see the office just here, the larger storage buildings just here and here. And the final photograph was looking at building 2, which is at lower height in terms of the 3 larger buildings along the southern boundary of the application site. This slide shows photographs taken from the road. The top left was looking across the site frontage in an easterly direction from Berricote Road. You can see the access points here and here for the application site. The bottom left shows a similar view. You can see the existing vegetation to the frontage of the site. The top right image was taken from the westernmost access point looking in an eastern direction away from the site. And the final photograph is looking back west from the adjacent site. So this is the application access point just here, and this is the neighbouring access with the Berricote Road just here. This slide shows a photograph taken from public right-of-way, which is opposite the site, looking south. So this is a right-of-way just here. This is the application site, and the orange arrow is the approximate location of the new building. Subject to conditions and notes, the principle of development is supported, and subject to conditions and notes, development is not considered to give rise to any other planning harm. It is therefore recommended that planning permission be granted on this basis. There are a number of updates for this application which have been circulated on the update sheet. These include a revised approved plan condition and condition 8. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no speakers, so members. Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Councillor Bode. When I reading the report, this was originally 1,600 square metres and now reduced to just under 1,000 square metres. At 1,600 square metres, would we have recommended rejection because it's too large? Can you explain the numbers there, please?
Yes, so during the course of the application, we have received a number of amendments in response to both technical consultees and in response to concerns raised by officers. We raised concerns with the first iteration of the plans, so if I just bring them up, I do have them on the slide. It was much taller, the building was much larger, and we had concerns from a Greenbelt perspective. So these, if you just bear with me 2 seconds, are the superseded plans. This was a building that was proposed, and it was much taller in height in terms of what we were looking at when looking at the overall development on the site. Also, during the course of the application, we did have a lawful development certificate submitted, so the officer could consider what buildings on site were lawful and how much weight we could afford them in the planning assessment. So initially, we raised concerns. We received amendments during the course of the application. Now we're satisfied as officers to support the application on that basis.
Okay, and is 1,000 square metres a relevant planning limit?
So in terms of the size of it, if over 1,000 square metres requires a different assessment, it's a major scheme. It's been reduced in light of the concerns, which is how we've assessed it on that basis with the amendments.
The objection from the parish council, who are not here to represent it, concerned particularly about the green belt and questioning whether it's overdevelopment in the green belt. Could you please comment on that specifically and how you've assessed whether it is harming the green belt in terms of openness?
So in terms of the assessment, we have had regard to the parish council comments, and I did go back to see if their objections still stood, and it did as of January of this year, which is why it's been triggered to planning committee. From a green belt perspective, we've looked at all of the key considerations. Like I said, we had lawful development certificates submitted, so we could work out as officers how much weight to afford to the buildings on site in terms of what the existing situation is and how much more harmful this would be. We've done calculations, we've looked at it in terms of the different exceptions under the MPPF, and in this case, we've done it under a grey belt assessment, so the applicants provided further justification on need, and we've looked at it within the parameters of the proposal. So subject to conditions, which remove the buildings that are proposed to be demolished and remove the external storage that's currently on the site, officers have fully considered the green belt assessment as part of this.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it doesn't help having the polytunnels on that picture because it looks absolutely enormous. Don't do it any favours. Councillor Hazelwood.
Yes, just clarification on a couple of points in the report. So you refer to paragraph 88 of the MPPF, and it refers to expansion of buildings, business in rural areas through the conversion of existing buildings and well-designed, beautiful new buildings. And I wondered if that's what you felt that this proposal was, a well-designed, beautiful new building. And secondly, you talked about opportunities to make locations more sustainable. And I wondered whether you felt opportunities have been taken, for example, around improving insulation, solar panels, environmental net gain.
Thank you. So in terms of when we're looking at character and design, subject to material condition and landscaping, officers are satisfied there wouldn't be harm to the character of the area as part of the revisions that have come forward. In terms of requirements under our policies in the DPD, it would be NZC4, which would be applicable in this case, and we have got an energy statement submitted as part of the application where they've considered solar gain efficiencies in terms of recycling materials as well, and they're looking in terms of BREEAM to achieve a very good standard. So that's part of the aspirations of what we've had forward as part of this scheme.
So does the scheme make use of additional solar panels to generate energy?
It's not proposed as part of this scheme, but in line with our policies, it's met the relevant requirements. We're satisfied that that's met.
Okay. Next. Councillor Kennedy.
I think if there are no other speakers, I can see no reason why we shouldn't grant this application in accordance with officer's recommendation, including the conditions applied, and I propose that.
Thank you. So I've proposed to have a seconder. Councillor Dixon. You want to say anything?
I'm happy to second it. Nothing to add.
Yeah, we need to also include subject to inclusion of condition 8 and an additional condition as outlined in the addendum. So you're accepting both of those?
Yes.
So you're both accepting those. So with that provision and addition, all those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. That is carried. Thank you. We've now got the enforcement report, which I have asked in future, can we have it on landscape rather than portrait so we can actually stand a chance of reading it. Any comments? Councillor Kennedy.
Yes, I've had a number of residents very concerned about the way that trees are treated after development, after planning permission has been given. and people commenting that trees seem to have been destroyed that they thought would be preserved. And I'm just wondering what enforcement's role is in doing that. I'm thinking particularly along the Leamington Road in Kenilworth with the Kenilworth Gate development, where a large section of hedge was taken out by the developers, causing a lot of unhappiness among residents, and also the treatment of some of the other trees in the land east of Kenilworth, which has led to a number of residents' complaints. What is the role of enforcement, or is it a matter of green spaces in terms of guaranteeing that the conditions of planning in relation to trees and hedgerows are indeed adhered to?
Sorry, Councillor Kennedy, I didn't quite catch all of that. Would you mind just summarising? I understood it was about trees and hedgerows.
Yeah, because those are often part of the planning conditions. So
Yeah.
does enforcement have a role in ensuring that trees and hedgerows are maintained in line with the planning conditions? Because I've had a number of complaints from residents who've been very concerned about this.
Thank you. Yes, we don't have a role that monitors that in relation to ongoing developments. What we would normally, or the way the planning enforcement role would normally operate, would be if there were concerns about the way a landscaping scheme or condition had been complied with, or if there were concerns about the loss of trees or the loss of other vegetation within a development, contrary to what was set out in the planning application, we would respond to those complaints. But if you're asking whether we have a structured means of monitoring developments, we simply don't have the number of staff or the capacity that we would need to do that. But if we did, that would be a planning enforcement function, and we are looking to expand and increase monitoring of compliance of planning permissions generally where we can do. Hopefully you'll appreciate, as things stand, it's quite a small team, and it's a constant juggle of priorities to make sure that we are looking at the most harmful cases. But where capacity does arise, that is something that we're looking to increase. But it's quite a challenge at the moment, given the level of resourcing that we have.
So if there are concerns, it's important that we then raise them with planning enforcement. If there are concerns, if there are concerns, say, about destruction of hedgerows and so on, then we should raise those immediately. With
yes, absolutely, and they would be followed up, yes.
Thank you.
Any other comments? No, in that case, I declare the meeting closed. There will be no further business for the committee. The appeals report. We missed that. Any conditions, comments? Councillor Phillips.
Where an appeal is dismissed on a retrospective planning issue, how long does the enforcement take to, how long does enforcement give for that particular appeal to be implemented on? So it hasn't been very clear. How long does the applicant have to take down the offending structure?
It depends. It depends on what the structure is. It depends on a judgment as to what a realistic timescale to undertake whatever operations were required would be. Generally, in enforcement terms, if we find ourselves in the position of prosecuting for non-compliance with an enforcement notice or a notice requiring that development be removed or changed, it generally helps for the local planning authority to be seen to be reasonable. Now, when I say reasonable, I'm not suggesting that we should give a significantly extended period of time to comply. But where you have a proposal that involves the demolition of a particular structure, if the reality is that the sort of the planning and the undertaking of that demolition would, for example, take 2 months, then we would generally err on the side of caution and allow 3 months, because if that then isn't complied with, it strengthens our hand in the courts. We can't really, Councillor, talk about specific cases in this forum, but if there is a specific case that you wanted to flag, please do. I suspect there may be a particular circumstance sitting behind your question, but very happy to discuss that further with you if that would help.
Thank you.
Yes, I have to say, having gone through the list, which is difficult to see because it's the wrong way around, there aren't that many where we actually take it all the way through or have a date. So, you know, enforcement notice issued, well, yeah, so where do we move on from there? And I think that's where the public want to see something where...
What I would say, Councillor, is that enforcement work can sometimes be perceived to be slow and spinning things out. That's often because there are lots of checks and balances in the process, but I think the key to successful enforcement is sometimes to play the long game, and sometimes it's a very long game. You know, there are cases where we're looking at prosecutions. There is a case which I obviously can't go into in any detail where the council is looking to take direct action, i.e. to go in and undertake the enforcement action itself. And all of these things take time. And what I hope that the enforcement report that we produce now on a monthly basis helps to show is just, you know, the sheer volume of cases where we are taking enforcement action. Because the report that you've seen, that isn't all of the enforcement cases that we're looking at. That is those cases where action is either planned or it's underway or it's kind of moved beyond that. And again, it's a small team. They work very hard, and certainly my view as the manager is that we're seeing some really good results. But some of those results do take longer than we might all expect.
Thank you. Anyone else? No?
Can I say something else on the appeals? Thank you, Chair. So one of the things that we've added to the appeals report this time is a section on our performance as a local planning authority on the quality of decision making. We've talked about this previously, and this is the monitoring that the government does of how local planning authorities are performing in terms of the quality of the decisions that they're making. And that is, the way that that's looked at is at the proportion or the number of appeals on major planning applications which are allowed, and it's as a proportion of the number of major decisions that the council takes. And at the moment, the government are looking at the period April 23 to March 25. So that's a 2-year period, and we're going back almost a year. And the line is, or the cut-off is 10%. So as a proportion of all of the decisions that we as a local planning authority make on major applications, some of them come to planning committee, some of them are dealt with under delegated powers. If more than 10% of those decisions go to appeal and the appeals are allowed, that is seen to be a poorly performing local planning authority. And the consequence of that is that the council could be put into special measures. And what special measures means is that if I was an applicant and I wanted to build however many houses in the district or do anything else in the district, which was a major proposal, I could choose whether I wanted the local planning authority to determine that application or whether I wanted the planning inspectorate to determine that application. So the consequence is that we as a local planning authority, that you as a planning committee, could find developments being approved where we don't have any input into that. And I'm flagging that because it's clearly something to be avoided. And the way that this is measured is on a rolling basis. So although the government are currently looking at that period, April 23 to March 25, clearly there's, we're now on to March 26, and in another few months they'll be looking at the period that we're in at the moment. And I flag it because I think it's really important that members of this committee are aware of this. For the period that we're being judged on at the moment, our officers' calculation is that we're running at 8%. So that's quite close to the 10%. The government's view is that that's not correct and that we're actually over the 10%. Now, the government get their information from a variety of sources, and there is, I'm told, room for error there. And that's obviously something that we are seeking further clarification on. The point of all of this is just really to reinforce the importance of, as a committee, as you do, thinking very carefully, thinking very cautiously about the decisions that you make, because, and us as officers, because, Chair, it doesn't take many decisions which go to appeal on major proposals and which are then allowed for us to start sailing perilously close to that 10%. So I've added that section into the appeals report, and we will leave it there, and it will obviously update for each committee meeting, but very much so that you as planning committee can see how that's looking at the moment. So if I can just finish on this element on one note. So the current period, we've made 25 decisions on major planning applications, and we've refused 6 of those. 3 of those were refused by planning committee, contrary to officer recommendation. 3 of them were refused by officers under delegated powers. We've also had 1 appeal allowed, and that was appeal against non-determination, and that was the appeal for the Henley Road Traveller development, which you may remember. We've got one appeal ongoing at the moment, which was a proposal for a solar farm, which you considered at 6 to 8 months ago, I think. And then we've got a number of other refusals, which could still go to appeal, but haven't done as of yet. So for the period in which we find ourselves at the moment, we're running at 4% appeals or decisions allowed on appeal as a proportion of the major decisions that we make. However, again, Chair, the point is it wouldn't take much to push that over the 10%. Really, really important, I think, for us as a local planning authority to be aware of that, and so we will continue to keep the committee appraised of where we think we're at.
Very sobering thoughts, I think. Councillor Phillips.
So thank you for that. Tonight's one on Chesterton Gardens, does that count as one in the number? Has that gone, say, from 25 to 26? Does that count as a major development approval, or is that just because it's a minor change, it doesn't count?
Which one are you referring to, Councillor?
The first one we had this evening. Chesterton Gardens. Because that was 200 houses, but we're only adding 14 extra. So would that count as a major approval or not? So I think that's where the marginal bits get a little bit confusing.
The application that you've just considered, yeah, that is a major proposal, and
so if it comes in 3 or 4 times, we approve 3 or 4.
You didn't refuse it, councillors.
No,
so.
no, we didn't refuse it.
but had you? So yeah, potentially yes, that might have added to that risk.
If that comes back another 2 times for whatever reason, that each time goes in our favour if we approve it.
Well, the fact that we've determined, or we will have determined that application, that it was approved. So the measure, of course, is relative in terms of the number of decisions that you're making and the number of appeals. And as the number of decisions increases, so as the number of decisions increases that you've allowed, then that would work in our favour. But it's a moving target, and it's something that really hasn't been flagged as an issue for us until recently, but it is now a potential issue and important for us to be aware of.
So it's quite interesting on that Chesterton Gardens, where it's been in and out of being called in, the government to call in through other people putting pressure on external. So how you start measuring that? It gets very complicated, so people need to stay out of the way if they don't know what they're talking about, or they need to clarify what they know. Councillor Dixon?
Yes, thank you, Gary, for that. This information is useful. As a matter of interest, talking to your opposite numbers at the other district and borough LPAs, can you give us any reassurance as to what their situation is? I know it's not entirely relevant to our discussions.
I don't know, but I'm meeting with them on Monday, so I will find out.
Okay, on my third attempt, I think we've finished all the business of this meeting, so I declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.